Her name was Lily. She was 9 years old, and she arrived at my back door on Tuesday morning, holding her mother's hand with the specific grip of a child who is in an unfamiliar place and is managing the unfamiliarity by maintaining physical contact with the person she trusts most. She had dark hair and her grandmother's posture, and a backpack that was almost as large as she was, which she was wearing in the front of her body rather than the back, hugged to her chest like a second layer of armor. Sarah said, "This is Dr. Carver. I told you about him." Lily looked at me. She said, "Are you the sad doctor?" Sarah said, "Lily." Lily said, "That's what Grandma calls you, the sad doctor who helps people." I told her that was probably an accurate description. She looked past me into the kitchen. She looked at the fake succulent and the cactus on the windowsill, the 2 cups already on the counter, the garden through the back window in the November light. She said, "Do you have any animals?" I told her I had a dog named Bo. Her entire posture changed. The backpack came down from her chest. She looked at me with the sudden, complete attention of a 9-year-old who has just received critical information. She said, "Where is he?" I told her Bo was in the living room and that he was old and slept most of the morning, but that she was welcome to go say hello. She looked at her mother. Sarah said, "Go ahead." The backpack was abandoned by the door in under 3 seconds. Carol was already at the table. She watched her granddaughter disappear into the living room, and her face did the specific thing that grandparents' faces do, the softening, the particular warmth of someone watching a small person they love move through the world. She said, "She's been asking about today all week." Sarah sat down. She said, "She's been asking about Richard all week, all month, every week." She looked at her hands. I don't know what to tell her. I don't know how to answer the questions. From the living room, the sound of Bo's tail thumping against the floor. Then Lily's voice, low and serious, saying something to him that I couldn't make out from the kitchen. Norma arrived 4 minutes later, looked at the backpack by the door, looked at me, and said, "You have a child in your house." I told her I was aware. She said, "Whose child?" I told her it was Sarah's daughter. She said, "How old?" I told her 9. Norma said, "Perfect. I'm excellent with children." I poured the coffee, what Lily asked, and Wyatt stopped the room. Lily came back from the living room about 10 minutes after she had gone, with Bo moving slowly behind her. She had apparently conducted a full introduction and established a relationship, because Bo, who at 8 years old conserved his social energy carefully, was following her with the willing, slightly surprised expression of a dog who has encountered someone worth moving for. She sat on the floor next to Bo and put her hand on his back. She looked up at the table. She said, "Grandma, does Bo miss your friend?" "The lady who died?" Carol said. "Margaret. Her name was Margaret. And yes, I think he probably does miss her." Lily considered this. She said, "Does he know she's not coming back?" I said, "I think he understands it in the way dogs understand things, not the way we do. But he knows something changed." Lily looked at Bo. She said, "I think that's sad, to know something changed but not understand why." She said it with the specific, unguarded clarity of a 9-year-old who has not yet learned to edit her observations for the comfort of the adults around her. Just the thing, stated plainly, exactly as she understood it. The table was quiet for a moment. Then Lily looked up at me. She said, "Where did she go?" "Margaret. Where do people go when they die?" And there it was. The question Sarah had warned me about. The question that had been coming since Lily was told, in whatever age-appropriate language Sarah had found, that her grandfather was gone. The question that 9-year-olds ask with the full expectation of an honest answer because they have not yet learned to accept the deflection that most adults offer when a question is too large for a comfortable response. The room was completely still. Norma opened her mouth. I looked at her. She closed it. I will remember that moment for the rest of my life. What I said, and what I was thinking before I said it. I want to tell you what went through my mind in the seconds before I answered Lily's question, because I think the interior process is as important as the answer itself. I spent 40 years in emergency medicine. I have been present at more than 400 deaths. I have sat in consultation rooms with more families than I can count and delivered news that reorganized their understanding of their lives in the span of a sentence. I have been asked, in the specific grammar of those rooms, every version of the question Lily was asking. Is there anything after this? Where do they go? Will I see them again? I have never answered those questions dishonestly. I have also never answered them with a certainty I did not possess. There is a specific professional and personal discipline required to sit with a grieving person in the presence of those questions and give them the thing that is actually useful rather than the thing that is comfortable. To neither offer false certainty nor retreat into clinical agnosticism that leaves the person alone with nothing. What I had learned across 40 years of those rooms was that the useful answer to the question of where people go was not a theological position or a scientific assertion, or a carefully managed neither yes nor no. The useful answer was something different. It was the honest account of what I had observed, what I had actually seen in those rooms, across those 400 deaths, in the specific faces and the reaching and the final moments of 400 people at the end of their lives. And what I had observed, what I had seen, not as a matter of faith, but as a matter of direct and prolonged witness, was this: the love did not stop. Not in the room, not in the people left behind, not in the way the absent ones continued to be present in the lives of the people who had loved them. In the recipe cards and the notebooks and the fake succulents and the Tuesday tables, and the 8-year-old yellow Labrador who was following a 9-year-old girl around a kitchen in November because something in him recognized the quality of attention she was giving him and responded to it. The love did not stop. That was what I had observed. That was what I knew. I looked at Lily. I said, "Can I tell you what I know from 40 years of being a doctor?" She nodded. I said, "I've been in the room when a lot of people died, more than I can count, and I have watched very carefully, because that's what doctors do. We watch carefully and we pay attention to what actually happens." She was listening with the full, unpartitioned attention of a child for whom this conversation was the most important thing happening in the world right now. I said, what I noticed every single time was that the love didn't go anywhere. She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "The people who died, their bodies stopped. That part is real, and I won't pretend it isn't. But the love they had for the people they left behind, that didn't stop. The families I sat with, the people who loved the person who had just died, they came out of those rooms still completely full of love. And the person they loved was gone, but the love was still there, moving around, going places." Lily looked at me carefully. She said, "Where did it go?" I said, "Into the people they loved." "Your grandfather. Your mom tells me you think about him." She said, "Every day." I said, "That's his love. Still moving, still going places. It went into you." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at Bo. She said, "Did Margaret's love go into Bo?" I told her I thought some of it probably had. She said, "Is that why he followed me?" because I have love in me from people who died. I sat with that for a moment. She had taken what I said and extended it with the specific, unsentimental logic of a 9-year-old who was working something out in real time, and she had arrived somewhere that I had not quite put into words before in quite that form. I said, "You know what? I think that might be exactly right." She looked down at Bo with an expression of considerable satisfaction. The expression of a child who has just understood something important and is taking a moment to let it settle. Then she said, "Can I give him a treat? Does he like treats?" I told her he did. She said, "Okay, I'll give him a treat from me and one from Grandpa." She said it simply, as a logistical decision. 2 treats. One from her, one from Richard. The accounting of a 9-year-old who has just built a theology in 10 minutes at a kitchen table and is already applying it practically. Norma made a sound. I looked at her. She was looking at the ceiling. Her jaw was set in the specific way of a person who has made a commitment not to cry and is honoring that commitment through sheer force of will. The conversation that followed, about what children know. After the treat situation was resolved, Lily gave Bo 2 treats with the careful ceremony of someone conducting a ritual. She came and sat at the table with us. Not at the edge, not clinging to Sarah. At the table, with the unself-conscious ease of a child who has decided she belongs somewhere and has no further questions about it. She picked up a cookie. She said, "These are Grandpa's cookies." Carol said, "I'm still learning the recipe." Lily said, "They taste like him." She said it with complete matter-of-fact certainty, no hesitation. The vanilla part, especially. Carol put her hand over her mouth for a brief moment. Sarah said, "How do you know what the vanilla part tastes like?" Lily said, "Because he used to let me put the vanilla in when we made them together. He always said more than it says on the recipe. He'd hold my hand over the bottle and let me pour." The table was very still. Carol said, very quietly, "I didn't know that." Lily said, "Every time I visited. That was our job. Grandma would do the rest, but the vanilla was our job." She took another bite of the cookie. "You put in the right amount this time." Carol looked at her granddaughter. She said, "Did I? It tastes exactly right now. I want to stay with this moment for a moment, because I think it contains something important about what children carry and what they know that adults frequently underestimate." Lily knew the recipe, not intellectually. She had never read the card. She knew it in her hands, in her body, in the specific kinesthetic memory of standing next to her grandfather at the kitchen counter, with her hand over a vanilla bottle while he held her wrist and guided the pour. She carried the recipe in a different container than the card in the drawer. She carried it in the memory of being specifically loved, and she had no difficulty accessing it, no performance, no managed grief. She said it tasted right, and she moved on to the next thing, because that is what children do. They hold the loss and the love simultaneously, without requiring them to be separated or resolved, or one to take precedence over the other. Lily was not finished grieving her grandfather. She would not be finished for years. But she was also entirely in the room, eating a cookie, deciding how many treats Bo should receive on behalf of a man she loved, contributing her knowledge of the vanilla to a conversation among adults who needed it. She was doing it right, not because she had figured out the correct way to grieve, because she had not yet been taught the incorrect way, what children know about grief that adults forget. I want to talk about this directly, because I think it is one of the most important observations I have accumulated across 40 years of being in those rooms and 3 years of being in my own. Children grieve differently than adults. Not better or worse, differently. And the difference, observed carefully, contains an instruction for adults that is worth examining. Children do not separate the grief from the love. Adults learn to separate them. We are taught, implicitly and explicitly, that grief is a state to be moved through, a temporary condition, an emotional weather that should resolve into something more stable. We learn to manage the grief, to keep it from contaminating the ordinary days, to maintain functional surfaces that reassure the people around us that the process is proceeding correctly. And in the managing of it, we sometimes, not always, but sometimes, separate the grief so thoroughly from the love that the love itself becomes less accessible. The effort of containing the loss produces a kind of emotional austerity that affects everything, not just the sadness. The person who has successfully managed their grief into manageability has sometimes also managed their capacity for the full range of what the love contained. Lily had not done this. She talked about Richard in the same conversation where she ate his cookies and informed us about the vanilla. She asked about where he went, and then immediately applied the answer to the question of how many treats Beau should receive. She held the grandfather who was gone, and the dog in front of her, and the cookies on the plate, and the answer to a theological question, all in the same moment, without requiring any of them to be separate from the others. That is the natural human capacity for grief, before the culture trains it into something more contained. I watched Lily at that table, and I thought about my own first months after Margaret died. The deliberate management. The single cup of coffee as a statement about what was appropriate. The mornings I could not go into the garden because I had separated the garden so thoroughly from the joy of it that what remained was only the loss. I had been doing the adult version. Lily was doing the human version. I am not suggesting that adult management of grief is wrong. Some management is necessary, functional, the reasonable adaptation to a world that requires you to continue operating while you are in the middle of something that would, if fully experienced at full intensity at all times, make operating impossible. But I think most of us overmanage. I think the culture trains us to contain the grief so thoroughly that we contain the love along with it. And the instruction that children offer, if we are paying attention to them, is to let the two things be together, to let the grief and the love occupy the same room, the same conversation, the same cookie, the same Tuesday morning. Richard is in the vanilla. That is grief and love at the same time, held together, neither one diminishing the other. That is, I have come to believe, the actual goal. Not to finish the grief, to let the love outlast it. What Lily asked next, and what it cost me to answer. We had been at the table for about an hour when Lily, who had been quietly engaged with Beau for a stretch of time that had given the adults a window for the more difficult parts of the conversation, came back and sat down with the air of someone who has been thinking about something and has arrived at the question it was building toward. She said, "Dr. Carver, do you talk to Margaret?" I looked at her. She said, "After someone dies, do you still talk to them?" I thought about Carol telling me she talked to Richard's photograph for 20 minutes after her daughter told her to stop. I thought about the conversations I had conducted with the garden in the early months, on the assumption that Margaret could see it from wherever she was. I thought about reading passages out loud from books she had loved. I told Lily yes. She said, "Out loud or in your head?" I told her both, depending on the day. She said, "I talk to Grandpa in my head. At night, mostly, I tell him about school." She paused. "Mom says he can't hear me, but I think he can. I don't know why, I just think he can." She said it without defensiveness, not challenging her mother's position, just stating her own, with the calm certainty of a child who has decided something on the basis of interior evidence rather than external authority. I looked at Sarah. Sarah was looking at her hands. I said to Lily, I think you might be right. I don't know for certain. No one knows for certain. But in 40 years of being a doctor, of being in the room at the end of people's lives, I have come to believe that the connection between people who love each other is more durable than we can fully explain. Whether that means he can hear you in the specific way you mean, I don't know. What I do know is that the love you have for him is real. And real things don't disappear just because we can't see them. She thought about this. She said, like gravity. I said, exactly like gravity. She nodded, satisfied. She said, okay, I'm going to keep talking to him then. She went back to Bo. Sarah was very still. After a moment, she said quietly, without looking up from her hands, she's been doing that since the day he died, talking to him at night. And I told her he couldn't hear her because I didn't want her to be disappointed. I didn't want her to think someone was listening who wasn't. She said, but I think I was wrong. I told her I thought she probably was, she said. Not about the theology, about what she needed. She didn't need accuracy. She needed permission. She looked at her daughter on the floor with Bo. She said, I've been so afraid of her being wrong about the things she believes that I forgot she's 9 years old. And she lost her grandfather and she is doing something that helps her. Whether it works the way she thinks it works or not, it's helping her. And I told her to stop. She said it with a specific, clear-eyed self-assessment of a woman who has arrived at a correction and is not flinching from it. I told her it wasn't too late to uncorrect it. She said, I know. She got up, walked to the living room doorway and said, Lily. Lily looked up. Sarah said, I want to tell you something about talking to Grandpa. Lily waited. Sarah said, I was wrong when I said he couldn't hear you. I don't actually know that. And even if I don't know for sure, if it helps you and it makes you feel close to him, then I don't want you to stop, okay? Lily looked at her mother for a moment. She said, I know you were trying to protect me. Sarah said, I was. Lily said, it's okay. You can tell Grandpa you're sorry tonight. I'll be talking to him too. We can both say hi. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, okay, yeah, we'll both say hi. She came back to the table. Norma had been completely silent for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, which I believe is a personal record. She said, that child is remarkable. Carol said, she gets it from Richard. Norma said, she gets it from you. Carol looked at her. Norma said, Richard was a good man, but you're the one who showed her how to love people without making them feel like they have to earn it. She got that from watching you. She said it quickly, in the Norma way. The true thing delivered before the brain can edit it, with the immediate pivot incoming. But this time, the pivot didn't come. She just sat with what she'd said. Carol said very softly, thank you, Norma. Norma said, don't thank me. I'm just accurate. What the morning taught me about the questions we're afraid to ask. I want to step back from the specific conversation and talk about something that Lily's question produced in me that I have been sitting with all week. Lily asked where Margaret went. She asked it directly, without preamble, without the careful social architecture that adults build around questions they suspect might be too large or too uncomfortable or too revealing of what they don't know. She just asked. And in the asking, in the specific, unguarded, I need to know quality of it, she gave everyone at that table permission to be in the presence of the question without having to pretend it had a clean answer. I have been thinking about how rarely adults do that, not because the questions aren't there. The questions are there. In every grief I have witnessed, in every family I have sat with across 40 years, the questions are there, visible in the face, in the body language, in the specific quality of silence that settles over a room when someone dies. And the people left behind are trying to understand what has just happened to the world. Where did they go? Is there anything after this? Will I feel this forever? Is the love still there somewhere, even if the person isn't? Adults carry these questions. They carry them quietly, for years sometimes, without finding a place to put them down. They manage them the way Ruth managed her grief, with functional surfaces and appropriate responses, and the performance of having processed something that has not, in fact, been processed, because asking the question feels vulnerable. It feels like an admission of not knowing something you are supposed to have figured out by adulthood. It feels like reopening something that you have worked to close. Lily had not learned to be afraid of the question. She walked in, sat down, and asked the largest question available to her, with Bo's tail thumping against the floor in the background. And she received the answer, and extended it, and applied it to the treat situation, and moved on. And in doing so, she gave every adult at that table something they had not known they needed until they received it. Permission to not know. Permission to sit with the question without requiring it to be resolved. Permission to say what I actually said. I have observed that the love does not stop. I do not know with certainty what happens after. I believe the connection is more durable than we can explain. And to have that be sufficient. Not a complete answer, a true one. I think many of us are carrying questions about the people we have lost that we have not put into words, because we are afraid that putting them into words will reveal how much we don't know, how unresolved things still are, how present the absence still is, years after the conventional timeline for grief has concluded. I want to give you the same permission Lily gave this table. You are allowed to ask the question. You are allowed to say, I don't know where she went. I don't know if he can hear me. I don't know whether the love I still feel for the person who is gone is reaching somewhere, or circling inside me with nowhere to land. You are allowed to not know. And you are allowed to talk to them anyway. In your head, at night, with no certainty about whether anyone is receiving the transmission. Because the talking is not only about the receiving. The talking is also about you, about the continuity of the relationship you had with that person, about the ongoing conversation that death interrupted but did not end, about the specific and irreplaceable act of saying things out loud that you would have said to them if they were here. Keep saying the things, even without certainty, about the destination. The saying matters, regardless. The patient whose son asked me the same question. I want to tell you about a conversation I had in my 31st year of emergency medicine, because it connects to what Lily asked and what I have been thinking about since. A man in his late 60s, I'll call him Paul, came in with his adult son, who was perhaps 35. Paul was the patient. His son, whose name was James, sat in the family consultation room and waited while we worked. When I went out to update James, he was sitting very straight, both hands flat on the table, with the expression of someone who has been holding themselves together for several hours through sheer application of will. I told him we were doing everything possible, that the situation was serious, but not yet determined. He nodded. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" I told him he could. He said, "You've been doing this for a long time. You've been in the room when people die." He paused. "Is there anything there? At the end? Do you ever see anything?" I understood immediately what he was asking. Not for statistics, not for clinical data, for testimony, for the account of a witness who had been in the room more often than almost anyone, and might have observed something that was not available in books or research, or the official positions of institutions. I sat down across from him. I said, "I have been in the room at the end of many lives, and I want to tell you honestly what I have observed, which is different from telling you what I believe in a theological sense." He said, "Please." I said, "What I have observed consistently is that the people who are dying in the final period, when they are still conscious, reach for love. Always, without exception. Not for anything they built or earned or accumulated, for the people they loved, for the names of those people, for the specific, irreplaceable experience of being in contact with the love they had given and received across their lives." I said, "And what I have observed in the people left behind, in the families, in the waiting room, in the ones I spoke with years later, is that the love continued, changed shape, became heavier or lighter depending on the day, but continued." He looked at me. I said, "I cannot tell you with certainty what that means about what happens after. I am a physician, not a theologian. But I can tell you that in 40 years of watching people die and watching the people who loved them live on, I have not once observed the love stop. I have only observed it transform." He was quiet for a long moment. He said, "That's enough. That's actually enough." His father survived that particular crisis. He lived for several more years. But James's question, and the specific relief in his face when I answered it, with what I had actually seen rather than what I was supposed to say, that stayed with me. Because he was asking Lily's question. The same question, in adult language, with adult self-consciousness about the asking of it. Where do they go? Is there anything there? Does the love continue? I have answered that question many times since James asked it. I will answer it however many more times I am asked it, and the answer is always the same, because it is the only honest answer I have. I don't know where they go. I know the love continues. That is what I have observed. That is what I know. The end of Tuesday and what Lily did before she left. Lily left with her mother at around noon. She had spent the second half of the morning divided between the table and the floor with Beau, oscillating between the adult conversation, which she tracked with the particular alertness of a child who understands she is being included in something significant, and the dog, who had by this point fully committed to the relationship and was following her movements with the patient attention of someone who has decided that this particular person is worth staying close to. Before she put her backpack on, she came to the kitchen counter. She looked at the fake succulent and the cactus, she said. "Who gave you those?" I told her the succulent was from Norma and the cactus was from her grandmother. She said, "The cactus is from my grandpa too. Grandma was married to him. So when she gives you something, some of it is from him." She said this with the matter-of-fact logic of a child who has been thinking about the distribution of love and has arrived at a sensible accounting system for it. I told her that was a very good way to think about it. She looked at the succulent. She said, "Is Margaret in the succulent?" I told her I thought some of her probably was. She said, "Good. Then you have both of them on your windowsill." She put her backpack on, correctly this time, on her back, and she went to Beau and she put her face close to his, and she said something to him very quietly that I could not hear and did not try to. Then she straightened up. She said, "I'll come back next Tuesday if that's okay." I told her it was okay. She said, "I have more questions." I told her I expected she did. She said, "Not scary ones, just regular ones." I told her I would do my best with the regular ones. She waved at Norma, who waved back with a restraint entirely uncharacteristic of her. She hugged Carol for a long moment. Not the quick hug of a child going through a social motion, but the real kind, the both arms around kind, the kind that means something specific. Carol held on. Then Lily and Sarah left. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Carol said, "She's going to be all right." Norma said, "She's already all right. She's been all right the whole time." Carol said, "I know." Norma said, "She just needed a table." She said it simply, the way Norma says the true things, quickly, without ceremony, as if they don't require the weight she is giving them. And then she picked up her cup and looked out the window at the garden and did not say anything else for a while. I looked at the windowsill, the fake succulent, the cactus, both of them on the windowsill. What I want you to take from this Tuesday, I want to give you 3 things before you go. The first is what Lily gave this table: permission to ask the question. Whatever question you have been carrying, about someone you have lost, about where they are, about whether the love is still moving somewhere, about whether the talking you do into the silence at night is reaching anything. You are allowed to ask it. Not of me necessarily, though I will answer it as honestly as I know how, but of yourself, of the people in your life who share the loss, of the table you have, wherever your table is. Say the question out loud, not because saying it will produce a certain answer, because the question is part of what you are carrying, and carrying something in silence is heavier than carrying it with another person in the room. Ask it, the way Lily asked it, directly, without apology, with the full expectation of being taken seriously. The second thing is about the children in your life who are grieving. They are doing better than you think, not because the loss is smaller for them. It is not smaller. The love is the same size regardless of age, but because they have not yet learned to separate the grief from the love. And that undivided carrying is more sustainable than the adult version. What they need from you is not protection from the question. They have already asked the question. They ask it every night, in the quiet of their rooms, to whoever they believe is listening. What they need is permission to keep asking, to keep talking to the person who is gone, to keep believing that the love is still moving, that the grandfather is in the vanilla, that the connection is more durable than the absence suggests. Don't tell them he can't hear them. Tell them you don't know, and that you'll both say hi tonight. The third thing is about your own table. I started this channel in a kitchen that held 1 cup of coffee and a newspaper I could not read. The table was a place I moved through rather than a place I inhabited. Over 9 weeks of Tuesdays, it has become something different. It now holds, on a given Tuesday, a retired physician and a neighbor from Cleveland, and a widow who is learning her husband's cookie recipe, and a daughter who said the wrong thing because she couldn't fix the crying, and a 9-year-old girl who decided that an 8-year-old yellow Labrador was carrying inherited love. None of this was planned. All of it happened because someone showed up, and I let them in. And we sat at the table and said the real things instead of the managed things. And the table grew. Your table can grow too, not by planning it, by letting it, by being the kind of person whose kitchen is a place people come to say the real things, where the grief and the love are allowed to be in the same room, where the questions don't have to be certain to be valid, where a 9-year-old can ask where people go and receive an honest answer and apply it immediately to the treat logistics. That is a Tuesday table. Build one. Let people in. Say the real things, and let the table grow. In the comments, I want to ask you something. Is there a question you've been carrying that you haven't asked out loud yet? About someone you've lost? About where they are, or whether they can hear you, or whether any of this, the love, the connection, the vanilla, continues after? You don't have to have an answer. Just tell me the question. I'll be reading every one. And next week, Lily said she has more questions. She told me they're not scary ones, just regular ones. I have a feeling they are going to be the most important questions anyone has asked at this table. My name is Dr. Edward Carver. I'll see you then.